So I think like now I'm thinking of like going toward the main topic area, crime and punishment.
How I came to that.
I really, because you are expert on this crime, punishment, and all those things. I mean, when did you get this kind of interest? Like, when was that bulb light moment that you thought, oh my God, this is really interesting. This is the area I really want to.
I guess like so many things, it comes gradually. And because I wrote my dissertation on the use of troops for riot policing, I discovered afterwards that policing was a good area. There was a lot going on in the history of policing at that time. And I got involved with a group of historians at the Open University who were studying the history of policing specifically. And through policing, that of course is a subsection of a broader historical area of crime and criminal justice history. So that became the broader area that I'm working within, although I'm still mainly working on policing within that broader area. But just like my original interest in armies as a vehicle for social mobility, I looked at armies without being interested at all in military organizations or in battles. I couldn't care less about battles. Just tell me afterwards who won and we'll move on from there. So I moved away from that area because I desperately didn't want to be a military historian or be associated with military historian. And in policing, what really interests me is the exercise of power and the relationship with the population. So I'm actually mainly studying the policing when it's not police versus criminals, but police versus ordinary people who encounter the police in some situation or another. And they may be people who have sort of broken the law in a minor way, or they may be perfectly law-abiding citizens. But it's that relationship and the role of the police, not just in terms of catching criminals, but in terms of administering a society that interests me. And so I've spent a lot of my career working on police-public relations, and particularly citizens' complaints. What people complained about and what it meant to the complainants, and how the whole system of handling complaints, how that worked. And it is the sort of civil liberties angle that is actually my main interest into this.
So, policing is quite interesting term, because police, more or less, the way we see police, like in my country, Bangladesh, the police is like, it's a force, brutal force. So if you're involved with police, that means you're in trouble. So it linked with punishment, crime, all kind of bad things. Do you think, like, in your ideal society, the futuristic society, do you see like police is still there, or do you think that perhaps will not be them anymore?
That's a very, very good question. And I guess it depends on how we understand policing. In the 18th century, in most continental European countries, police meant public administration. That was it's police is actually the same word as policy. So it was not primarily a matter of catching criminals. They actually weren't involved in that at all. They were involved in cleaning streets and street lighting and public safety at a very basic level, and enforcing the laws in urban areas. There wasn't very much going on in rural areas, but in urban areas, making sure that city life functioned. And then in the 19th century, policing became increasingly associated with crime fighting, and that has much to do with the rise of the British model, the Peelite model in the London Metropolitan Police, because the way of selling the Robert Peel's police project to Parliament was as a crime-beating organization. You should fund this because we are fighting criminals. And that fighting criminals has always been the main justification for the existence, first of the Metropolitan Police and then of other police forces in this country. But if you actually investigate what police does in Britain, and all scholars had come to the same result, and I'm sure police would agree, that most of that time they're actually not fighting criminals. They're doing all kinds of administrative tasks, but it is still sort of the official raison d'être, the main legitimization for their existence, that is crime fighting. So if we sort of move away from the idea of policing just being crime fighting, but see it much, much broader, in the 18th century meaning, but also in a meaning that some scholars have pointed out, and that policing fundamentally could be understood as an early form of social welfare, that they were an early incarnation of the modern welfare state. And there are some legitimate arguments for looking at it in this way. So to come back to your question, can I see it in the future? Yes, I have difficulties imagining a society or a future well-functioning society without a force to enforce laws, because at the end of the day, the law doesn't count if it's not being enforced. And at some level, we need to have people that enforce the law. How they do it, we can discuss that, but sometimes coercion has to come into it. But most of the time, if the tax authorities enforce that you pay your taxes, they don't come in and rob your bank card off you and force you to pay your taxes that way. They have other means, fines and that. So if we look at it as an organization, or perhaps several organizations that are sort of split into tax authorities, social services, street policing, detective force, whatever, if we look at it in that way, police in the broad sense, I think is indispensable to society. It's just unfortunate that in so many countries it ends up, or it has traditionally always been, the strong arm of government in a very negative way, and it's often difficult for us to conceive of policing not being the strong arm of government enforcing heavy-handedly whatever measures come from above. But I can imagine a society where policing, in the very broad sense, is other than just the heavy hand of government.
I mean, I'll bring some more philosophical idea, just like I'm thinking of like some other philosophical understanding about policing. Because one of the things came out from this like Black Lives Matter movement is defund police, because police is thought in certain society they are actually they're oppressive force, and the police always target the people who are actually not to be targeted. And then I try to like bring like other examples, like things like if you talk about like even the simple couple of things, like UK's benefit fraud is like around, I think, £6 billion every year. But at the same time, UK's tax evasion is £120 billion. So it's just no match there, you see. But it looks like police is very good with like catching benefit frauds, but not good with like big chunk of things. So £120 billion, the UK government is losing £120 billion every year.
But the authorities, the tax authorities that really ought to check people's what people ought to pay and what they don't pay, they're underfunded, and it's actually not the police, because it has to be on an epic scale before it becomes strictly criminal and therefore an affair for detectives, for the police. The Inland Revenue, if they just checked and called up much more, then it's actually not necessarily in the first place a police affair. It's an administrative task but that's underfunded in this country. In the country I grew up with, the tax authorities, oh my God, you don't mess with the tax authorities. And they will know exactly. If you have bought an expensive car, the tax authorities, at least as it used to be, I don't know what it is today, but if they would be there next week, so where did you get the money to buy that expensive car? So this was actually completely disconnected from the force called the police, but the tax authorities were doing policing in the broad 18th century meaning. Public administration, going through the tax list to see is there a match between and yes, revenue and the way she spends the money, and if there isn't, then she will have to explain to us where that money came from.
Like, can I make it like kind of some kind of correlation between like if police catch the rich, that society becomes more egalitarian, and where the police doesn't catch the rich, that society becomes much more unequal?
Yeah, it's not just unequal. It has all kinds of repercussions because if the law is not enforced against the rich and powerful, then we can no longer talk about such fundamental things as equality before the law. We can, it's a fundamental principle that no one is above the law, that since the 18th century, or it was one of the key principles of the French Revolution, by abolishing the privileges of the nobility and the and the Catholic Church, that every citizen should be equal before the law. But if the law is not enforced towards certain groups, obviously, if we talk about the rich and powerful in particular, but it undermines both the respect of the law and the principle of equality of the law. But ultimately, it also undermines democracy because, well, inequality in itself undermines democracy because power goes with money. It's inevitable. I'm not making an ideological point here. I'm simply making a sociological observation. So, of course, we can have a society where there's no equality of the law, but then let's be honest about it. Let's not just claim that there's equality of the law if, in effect, the law doesn't apply to certain groups in society. At least in the 18th century, they were honest about it. They said, well, we're not going to.
But also, like with me, like if you compare like Danish tax evasion versus UK's tax evasion, I mean, that's the statistics. You can see that, oh my God, no. So you can say that, oh, UK is really a corrupt country, isn't it?
It would be compared to Denmark. Again, I'm sure that there's a lot of tax evasion in Denmark, but because it's a smaller country and because the tax authorities have traditionally been well funded, again, I think that is eroding now. But because they were well funded, it meant that there was much less scope for doing funny things, for evading. And then, of course, there's a question of evasion and tax evasion as opposed to actual tax fraud. As you can within the law. Tax avoidance versus tax evasion, which is criminal. And I guess a lot of the tax revenue that doesn't come in to the Britain to the UK authorities are perfectly legal. It's tax aversion. And at the end of the day, it's up to Parliament to put some plugs in the holes there and not allow certain things as being within the law, but that's up to them.
One thing I found that, the tax haven in the world, there is actually $32 trillion sitting there. 32 trillion.
Yeah.
And then I try to say that, this planet is really corrupt, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. What can I say? But at the end of the day, it's also because governments allow this to happen.
So then the subsequent logical conclusion will be that the system, the structure, the policing, the law, and everything you're talking about, actually, it helps the rich.
I think it's an observation that is easily made. Of course, many people, for ideological reasons, would deny that that's the case. But quite clearly, the law is not equal to the rich and the poor. I mean, there are an endless number of examples of how the law applies differently to rich and poor, and sometimes it's even built into the system. If you can't pay bail, for instance, you have to stay in jail awaiting your trial. These kind of fundamental mechanisms built into the system, but I think it's very difficult to argue that there is complete equality of the law, and that rich and poor have the same gets the same treatment within the criminal justice system. Your ability to pay a defense lawyer matters.
You can get away with a murder, isn't it?
Well, you may not ultimately be able to get away with murder, but you have a good chance. Of course, there are also people who are rich and powerful who get their comeuppance. Of course, depending on what you've been up to. But you can still then get perhaps a lighter sentence or better conditions, a nicer prison, or be sent home to sit out your sentence in your own sitting room. There are many different ways that can be done, whereas the dirt poor will inescapably end up in an unpleasant prison under for the same thing, or sometimes for less serious offences. And I don't think I'm saying anything that is particularly controversial, because that's has been observed by so many sociological studies, and it may be more true for some countries rather than others, but even if we look at Western democracies, I think we can we can see that there are some obvious gaps in the principle of equality before the law.
Trying to playing a devil's advocate here.
Of course.
So if the society becomes more equal, that will make this policing and all those things more like minimalist rather than
that again depends on how we define policing, whether it's in terms of sort of the strong arm of government, or whether it's a public administration. But I think it takes a good deal more than just equality, because if we have a country like, say, good old-fashioned communist East Germany, that was a country where actually there wasn't that great differences between rich and poor. Yes, if you were a grandee of the Communist Party, you had you had advantages and access to something that the ordinary Tom, Dick, or Harry didn't have access to. But even the grandees of the East German Communist parties, they were not fabulously rich. They were comparatively well off, but no more than that. So there was high levels of equality or lack of inequality in that society. But my God, was that a police state?
Yeah.
So equality in itself is no guarantee of anything. The only problem is that inequality is corrosive. Extreme inequality is corrosive at so many different levels. And that, of course, the moment I say that, then I opened myself to accusations of being a terrible socialist and anti-capitalist and all that. And I don't see myself as such. I've never voted for a socialist party in my life. And I don't even see myself as anti-capitalist in principle. But I do think there is a problem with the way we're even able to talk about capitalism, because we only have that word. We only have one word, capitalism, where actually we ought to have a string of words to describe different forms of capitalism. And because we only have one word, some of the most radical neoliberal capitalists have, again, they've hijacked the word, and any criticism of the most radical neoliberal form of capitalism is somehow anti-capitalism. And there's little we can say to that, because we don't have the vocabulary, we don't have the conceptual tools to say, well, actually, it's the neoliberal anything goes form of capitalism that I'm opposed to, but other forms of capitalism that actually allow ordinary people to set up businesses without being undercut by people with deep pockets, that's something I would be in favor of.
Like with me, like you gave this example of East Germany, I mean, during the Cold War. I mean, my problem with that kind of definition for equality in the society, because with me, like, the equality has to be equal under every term, not only the financial term, but also the in terms of power term as well. So the power has to be equal as well. Not like someone will, have more power than the ordinary people. So with me, like, that doesn't make any sense, because that's not actually equal society, because power is more problematic for me.
Of course, you are absolutely right. And I raised East Germany not as a shining example of a wonderful society with limited equality. All I meant was that that was a society where there actually wasn't much inequality, but it was a shitty society, very repressive, no political pluralism in any way. So it's certainly not something I would commend.
But at the same time, Soviet bloc during that time called themselves communist or socialists, and America also called them socialists. And then look at them, what they're doing. I mean, I think neither was true to the fact, but we just use those terms, and then we kind of vilify those terms, and then say that, oh, there's a problem there. I mean, with me, like, I'm not more with the terms, I'm more with the, if a capitalistic society becomes equal in terms of power and everything, then I've got no problem with that. No problem with that, So why should I need to call it in a certain way?
Yes, but when you say capitalist society, again, I'm sort of calling for some further definition of what is it that we mean. Do we mean a society where any form of attempt from the state to regulate or sanction the use of capital is absent or kept at a minimum, or are we talking about a society of with some clear limitations around what capital is allowed to do, because there's a law that has to ensure a level playing field. So if I set up a small shop, that I can be protected against unfair action by competitors with deeper pockets is, you know, there are all kinds of ways in which I think the state and the law have a crucial role to play in reining in the exercise of power of great capital.
Like, and I tell my students, like, if everyone is a millionaire, what's wrong with that?
Well, I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is that such a society has never existed where everybody is a millionaire. I mean,
but at the same time, Anja, it's not impossible to do that if you just redistribute the wealth around the world. That's possible, isn't it? It's not like, you know, far-fetched idea. It's actually, you know, possible.
Yes. The argument that would be raised against that is, yeah, you can start giving everybody £1 million by 1st of January, but when we reach the 31st of December, you will have inequality because people spend the money differently, and that's fair enough as an argument. So you may start out with everybody being a millionaire, but you won't end up with everybody being a millionaire. But I don't think that's really the way I want to think about it. The way I want to think about it is, how can we ensure that people in a society, everybody, have a realistic chance of having a decent place to live and an income that can provide them with a decent life. And when I say decent, you know, I'm a humble person. It's sort of pretty. It's nothing extravagant, but a roof over your head and food in your mouth. That must be, in my view, a human right. And we both know that is far from being a human right, and it's less and less being a human right. So there's some people who talk about introducing citizen wages, you know, where every citizen receive a basic income, not for work, but to survive, to have a decent society where people are not forced to live in the street because they can't afford anything else. So I think that's my baseline, rather than everybody being a millionaire. It's where you say, well, with wealth distribution, it would be possible for everybody to be a millionaire. I would say it's even more doable if we create a system where it is possible for everybody to have a decent, affordable house, even if they can't work. We would also get rid of the whole scramble of people who have problems enough in their lives that they somehow have to prove all the time that they actually are not able to work, because you know, they receive a sum of money every month, and that is enough to cover the costs of a decent place to live and food in their mouth. And if on top of that people earn money, great.
Mm.
Since we are living in societies where there is a disconnect between the number of jobs and the number of people who need to earn a living, then we have to address that problem in one way or another. Anyway, we live in societies where machines are taking over most of the jobs that needs to be done. Okay, let's take the full consequence of that and don't break that nexus between work and basic income.
Yeah. So like, I mean, just a small correction. When I say like, everyone gets $1 million, I meant it's a permanent position. You get 1 million continuous supply per year. So you'll never, run out of 1 million like permanent position.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can see like, I mean, why it's not possible the way we have been, we just cannot, the Homo sapiens cannot be, changed overnight and become, something different. So it's lots of things to, fix fast, and then you can go to that position.
But if we distributed enough money to everybody so that they could pay to have a house to stay in and enough food on their plate, then we also alleviated a lot of the problems that we currently have with taking care of elderly people, because suddenly it wouldn't be that difficult for family members to look after elderly generations, because they suddenly have the time, because they no longer need to go out and work in order to have the basics themselves. And I'm not suggesting that everybody should suddenly start becoming carers full time. All I'm saying is that it would alleviate a lot of the problems that we are living with today. It's pretty utopian, I know. It's not something that is politically viable the day after tomorrow. But hey, if I had explained to my great-grandparents what kind of society we're living in today, that would have been pretty utopian to them.
Yeah, that's true. I really want to bring Michel Foucault here. So I think Michel Foucault, I'm not a big expert on Michel Foucault. I just read, some random stuff. One thing I was quite interested about, this idea about this crime and punishment, so the modern idea is, the world progressed and we are becoming more, civilized. We don't punish people that much these days. But what Michel Foucault said that, the 18th century or 17th century, when the people were executed publicly, we're not doing execution publicly, but we are doing the same brutal apparatus behind the door. Do you think society is actually less punitive now, or do you think the structure is still there?
It's a very interesting question, and it requires some complex answers. Because one of Foucault's points about the 18th century Enlightenment and what they were trying to do, we have traditionally understood that they were trying to make punishment more humane. Get away from all the sort of gory, extreme forms of punishment, and instead make punishment more certain. But as he also shows, operating much more on the mind than on the body. So it's less bloody, less gory, but actually, from a psychological point of view, no less cruel and more controlling. And there comes all his thoughts about knowledge and exercise of power. But part of that argument is also that in the 18th century society, where these punishments had become uber cruel, and where you were punished after death, it wasn't enough just to lose your life. It was what I call, when I'm teaching this, I call it capital punishment plus, and capital punishment plus plus, and capital punishment plus plus plus, in terms of what was going to happen to your body after death, and thinking over long periods of time, hanging up the body of serious criminals, not just on the gallows so they died, but to have them hanging, have the body hanging there, and the birds picking at the body until the bones quite literally fell apart. That was part of it. But one of the reasons why they had such cruel punishments, and I think Foucault was very good at pointing this out, was that it was so easy for criminals to escape. It was so difficult to actually catch serious criminals unless you caught them in the act. Running away was ultra easy. And therefore, these extreme punishments, the logic behind them were that, yeah, you can run away. If you do this, you risk punishments that are extreme. And that's sort of the flip side of the high likelihood that you will not be brought to justice. Whereas modern criminal justice is more certain. It's more, of course you can escape justice for a long time, but the likelihood of you being caught is so much greater than it was in the 18th century, and therefore the sort of the rational weighing of risk and benefit. If you commit a crime, if I steal 10 million pounds, I weigh up what's the likelihood of me being caught and what's the benefit of me having these 10 millions. And of course, if there's high likelihood that I might run away, I might say, okay, I take the risk, even if I know that it will be extreme punishment when if I'm caught, but there's very little likelihood of me being caught. But my God, my 10 million pounds, I can certainly use that. So the question of whether we have become more humane is a difficult one, because the forms of punishment are much more bureaucratic and certain, whereas in the 18th century it's much more gamble. And if you lose that gamble, it's really bad. But hey ho, who would like to be locked up in a Brazilian prison these days, or a US prison for that matter? Or I'm just saying these are particularly bad institutions, but prison is rarely a pleasant experience. And once you get out, you still have the stigma on all your papers, so it will follow you for the rest of your life.
Like one last point, very last point. Like every now and then in UK, especially in the right-wing media, they bring this idea about, like bring back death penalty, capital punishment, and all those things. What do you think? Like why this kind of things people still are very much interested? like punishing someone, and then it looks like some people really want people to hang on the tree, and then afterwards the birds can pick them up, and then
But the thing is, one thing that I always discuss with my students is questions: what is punishment for? What is the purpose? What is it that we try to achieve? And there is a plethora of purposes, actually. There is the retribution, but there's also deterrence of others. There is keeping society safe from dangerous people. And whenever people come up with this capital punishment, it's actually a combination of several things. It's both the idea that justice has to be seen, that the victims of a serious crime have to feel that proper retribution has been made. You have caused me so much pain, now I'm causing you. Now society is causing you so much pain. So that's the retribution. There's the deterrence. This idea that if people think they can lose their life for having committed some form of crime, that then they won't do it. And we all know from countries where capital punishment is a thing, that things just don't work like that, because again, criminals will weigh up what is the potential benefit from my crime, and what do I risk? So it just doesn't quite work that well. And then there's the thing about defense of society. If you have got someone who is a dangerous person in whatever way, if you kill that person, then society is no longer at risk from this person, maybe risk from other people, but and all these mechanisms seem to be intertwined whenever people call for reinstatement of capital punishment, because it just seems to be such a quick solution to several of these, to effectively reach the goal in several of these, reach many of the several of these purposes.
I mean, what's the like ideal kind of punishment, do you think?
Wow, if I could answer that question, I would be a very famous scholar. The problem is that so far no one seems to have come up with a form of punishment that satisfy the range of purposes. So you can come up with a form of punishment, as they've experimented with in Norway, where they have prisons for a very serious crime that are actually quite nice. You give these people nice conditions. They're still locked up, but a lot of opportunities to better themselves. And there seems to be some good results in terms of recidivism. So in terms of lack of recidivism, that purpose, if that's a main purpose, that seemed to work. However, it doesn't work at all if in terms of the purpose of retribution. If the society wants to see a person punished seriously for what they have done. So if we take the extreme example of Anders Breivik, killing 92 people randomly because of his extremist ideologies, he's in prison. It is what it is. But I think a lot of people would say this is getting off very lightly compared to what he has actually done. So it's it's perhaps humane, but does it work in terms of retribution? He's locked up for life, so that should keep society safe from him. But it's difficult because one form of punishment rarely meets all the different possible purposes. And therefore there will always be people who feel that someone got off too light, or that it was too draconian, whatever punishment was applied.
My problem with this crime and punishment, this understanding is, I mean, with me, crime is always linked with some kind of social construct, so this person did that because of that social condition. So part of the society is also, is to blame for some of the crimes done because, society did not take care of this person, or, so lots of things are there. And I think my understanding is the ways, if the society progresses, so obviously Dundee in the 21st century is far better progress than 18th century's Dundee. So if that thing continues, and I think, society will try to learn these things more, open-minded way. But I mean, there's a lot of progress to be made before that. And if you don't do it, then these things will be always political and emotional and other things, and which will not do any purpose for anything.
The problem, I guess, is that the criminal justice system and the penal system, it's always a sticking plaster. And yet we cannot really do without the sticking plaster, because what you described to me sounds very much like radical criminology of the 1980s, where the position was essentially that crime doesn't exist. It's a social construct, and that it's caused by society. No, I have a lot of sympathy for that position, and to a great extent, that line of analysis does help us to understand some things. However, even people who are rich and powerful commit crime. So it's not just because of lack of opportunity and social deprivation that we have a criminal justice system. That there are people who transgress, even if we might say they have absolutely no material reasons to do so, but it still happens. So there has to be some kind of system that cater to transgression, however that transgression came about. I agree with you that we can try to socially alleviate some of the conditions which either generate high levels of crime or keep people in a structure of crime, but we can't socially engineer of society. There will always be transgressions of whatever rules society sets.
Because I mean, it is so interesting talk. I mean, can I just bring one more thing with Michel Foucault's idea about, because Michel Foucault talks about this this madness, madness and that, the way we treat the mad people now. So like he was saying that, in the 17th century or 16th century, if there is a mad person in the society, he can still live in the society and then part of, of that structure. And then people think, oh, he's mad, but he could live with everyone. But now if you find someone mad, we kind of like section them and put them in some kind of asylum center or things like that. What do you think? Is it a progress or?
Well, obviously, we don't lock up most people with mental health problems. The vast majority of people with mental health problems live in society, and it's only very severely disturbed people who constitute a danger to themselves or to others who are actually locked up. It's quite, I mean, what Foucault talks about, what he calls the great lockup, was the systematic rounding up of people who, well, some of them with mental illness, but others were just beggars, some were prostitutes, some were orphans, urchins in the street. Lock them up, all of them in bedlam and keep them there because society was neater without having them roaming around in the streets. But that's actually not the situation we're living with today, I think.
But I mean, we do those things, not like locking up prostitutes, locking up homeless people, locking up, street beggars.
Yes, we lock them up less than we did in the 19th century. And I mean, you can't be locked up just for prostitution because prostitution isn't as such illegal. But there's a whole plethora of other offenses from which that would make it possible for police to short-term lock up people in the street who they consider a nuisance. They do it less today than they used to, but also beggars are not systematically locked up for begging. It's more if they somehow do something that annoys police or somebody else, that they are being locked up. But it's not the begging or the prostitution in itself, particularly for homeless people, to even lie down somewhere. Benches are constructed deliberately in a way so that you can't lie across them, because with the armrests, that's totally on purpose. And we've got these places where there are uncomfortable knobs coming up, so you can't lie there. I don't see it as such as in terms of locking people up, but more that we just want them to go away, move on, stay on your feet. Don't show your face here because it doesn't fit into to our nice, clean, neat urban space. When I go to Copenhagen today, one of the things that I really notice is that it has become so neat and so clean, and so I can't help wondering where are the bums there used to be. I mentioned that I spent my sort of a part of my childhood in the Central Municipal Library, and one of the things about that library was in the hall before you got to the library, that was a gathering place for the alcoholic bums living in the street. And there was a certain, they were a nuisance, and sometimes they were shouting, and sometimes they were a bit unruly, and sometimes they went into the library, but it was a public place, so they had the right to be there. But somehow there was an understanding that they have to be somewhere, and it's snowing outside, and it's cold, and it's sort of legitimate. They are a pain in the neck, but they're part of the whole city.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is more and more being overridden by a desire to clean up and to create a public space that is neat and bourgeois. So I think my main concern about current society is less the locking up of people for banal reasons, but more the pushing them away, making their life impossible, because we don't want to see them anywhere. And at the end of the day, I wonder where they're supposed to go. They can't they exist.
But Anja, just like quick question here. So what's the difference between locking up and like driven away? Is there any difference there?
Well, in some respects, the locking up is the opposite of expelling. But if you're expelling people and they have nowhere to go, because the next place they go, they will also be expelled because they don't fit in, and we don't want to see them. I
mean, that's part of punishment, isn't it? It's punishment.
Yeah.
Both are punishment.
But if we go back to the 15th century and before, one key form of punishment was to be expelled from the community. And then you would have to go out in the forest and try to make your way there. The problem is that we're expelling people who actually can't go anywhere, because there's nowhere to go where they will not be a nuisance and be further expelled from.
I'm sorry, I asked lots of disturbing questions, because some of the things are like just doesn't make any sense to me. So I mean, I think you explained quite well some of the things, some of the intricacies, some of the complexities of even the modern life. So it has got lots of problem areas, lots of flaws, but that's the best we can get now. I mean,
and no easy solutions.
Okay, so like I'm like aware of time, because I mean we might take the whole day. So one thing is, just like I ask all my guest speaker who are like academics, what's your advice to the students who will do like undergrad degree on history, or someone wants to do postgrad on history, or wants to do like PhD in history? I mean, what kind of mindset you need to become a good historian?
That's a very big question. First of all, keep an open mind. Don't ask questions where you have already decided what the answers should be. You have to keep an open mind with your questions, that it may be this, that, or the other, and following from that, respect your findings. What you find, you find. Data, we have to try to make sure we've got as solid data as possible. But there's so much interpretation that where you can see that people have picked and chosen their data to fit what the story they want to tell. And I think we have to have the mindset of trying to seriously understand a problem on its own terms without imposing our ideology and preconceived desired interpretations, pre-constructed. That makes bad history. It also makes bad political analysis, as you know. I think in that respect, history is no different from other forms of social sciences. I think that's that would be my main advice.
Thank you, Anja. So we had a great time today, no? So
well, we definitely have good grounds for continuing the conversations. Yeah. The next time, I want to ask you more questions.
Yeah, that would be good. No, so like lots of things. So many things are just not easy to unpack. Yeah. And sometimes I feel that I need to unpack this and try to understand is today. And I don't think that's a good approach to say it.
Yeah, I guess understanding even the society we live in is a lifelong project. I guess over time, I think I get a little bit insight to some things, but every time I think I've got a little bit insight into something, then there are 10 other things that I have discovered that I just don't understand, and that I urgently need to get my head around. All the certainties and all the beliefs that I grew up with as a child, they are out of the window. Yeah. I can't use any of them because the world we live in now is so different from anything I expected, for better or for worse, as a child and as a young person. But it's, society moves on, and we somehow have to adjust. I have to adjust my understanding to that changing society.
I think that's very profound. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not absolute pleasure. So you made time.
Thank you very much, Abdullah.
Made time for me. It's like talk therapy for me, I'll try to get back to you more on Foucault, because Foucault is such a big field and fascinating character as well. So like some of the things I really want to talk, because there's not many people who actually are good with Foucault. Because
I guess as a historian, it's also endlessly frustrating to deal with him, because what he says about the past is something you just want to argue back all the time, because he wasn't a good historian.
No.
But at the same time, while doing bad history, he manages to say some very profound things that in all their historical wrongness are still something that we need to take into account and need to think carefully about. So by being wrong, he's
good,
still spot on. It's very weird, but like him or loathe him, you can't really get around him.
Yeah. Thank you, Anja. Okay, thank you. So I really enjoyed this talk, and you are always my hero. You'll come back to my podcast again, because we'll talk more and more and more. Yeah.
Yes.
So much. Okay.
But good luck with it, Abdullah, and we'll speak
soon.
We'll speak again soon. Yes. Bye.
Bye-bye.